Hi, so this is Jan, and I'm just going to go through the first day's module with you. You may be able to hear the sound of bird song. It's a lovely sunny morning to be doing this on. And the first thing we're going to look at is contracting. I'm sure you already work with contracts with your service users, and I'm wondering whether you do with your colleagues. So it's just good practice to, before you go into any communications, any coaching conversations that you think are going to be of any significance, and let's hope all conversations are of significance in one way. But if you're going to sit down and have a focused conversation, then you really need to be clear about a few things, and I'm just going to list what they are. You want to be clear about the desired outcomes. In other words, what does each of you want from this conversation? If it was 10 minutes on or an hour on or however long you've got, what would you want in place at the end of it? Who's got what responsibility in the conversation? Whose responsibility is it to time it, to bring issues to it, to be honest and open about things? Whose responsibility is it to offer challenge or support, and so on? Check out, if you're going to be a while particularly, just check out personal needs. Do you have any physical needs? Anything physiological, bad backs, headaches, whatever it's going to be, or any psychological needs where there are some environments that people can't be in? Just check those out and agree that you take adult responsibility for looking after those. If you're going to meet over a few times, which you're going to do with people in your work, where? How often? When? Is there any notice to it? Are you going to be face to face? What contact's allowed over a phone, for example? How often are you available? Are you going to do texts with each other or emails? Just get that all nice and clear. And really, really importantly, have a look at your ethical issues. How confidential is the conversation that you're having? Who's in the know? When would you break confidentiality? Would it be if somebody had broken the rules of the house? Would it be if they'd broken the law? Would it be if you're worried about their state of mind? When would it be, and who would you break it to? Make sure that's up front at the very beginning, because that's how you really gain and keep trust, is to be honest about these things. It's useful to identify your time frames. How long have you got? How long are you going to work together for? Is it a month? Is it 2 months? 3 months? Is there a limit to the work? And is there any expectation of payment? And I know that sounds a bit odd, but is there is there any return of, I'll do this for you, so I might be your colleague and say I'll be your coaching buddy, and you might say to me, well, what I'll do is give you feedback. So when I say payment, I think of it quite broadly. I don't think you're in the business of taking money from service users or colleagues for what you're doing, but there might be some real adult stuff going on about sharing inputs. You might want to look at methods if you're having a full coaching conversation. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? For example, for me, when I'm coaching people, I'll make it very clear I'm not here to give you advice. I am here to listen carefully. I'm here to help you identify what you want. I'm here to help you motivate yourself and to be honest with yourself, that kind of thing. Relationships important in our work, isn't it? I'm here because I'm a paid worker. You're here because you're a service user or because you're another paid worker. Do we have any boundaries to our relationship? Are we going to be friends or are we going to be friendly? Quite important to be clear on that, so that if there's any confusion, you've got a baseline to go back to. And another important thing is evaluation. What is it that you want out of the coaching conversation? We've said that at the beginning. And how will you know when you get there? So that, for us, for Graham and myself, in our experience, is the basis of a really good working relationship, to make those things explicit. If they're not explicit, then you've got nothing to complain about. If I'm not explicit with you as a colleague that we work respectfully, that we're very honest with each other, then if I feel disrespected by you, or if I feel that we haven't been honest, I've got nothing to go back to and say, you know, well, we promised. So it's just as well to have these things up front in whichever way you want to. So that's really the very first part of the first module of the course. Now then, this is a course about the psychologically informed environment. And what is that? You know, what the heck is that? Well, a psychologically informed environment is one where people within it are working in some kind of psychological framework. In other words, you're not just jabbing around at what kind of support you give to people. You've got some approach which is based in good evidence foundation. A psychologically informed environment is very much about the physical and social environment. What's it like to walk into your environment? In an ideal environment, what would you see? What would you not see? What would people be doing more of in your ideal psychologically informed environment, and what would they be doing less of? What kind of atmosphere would you have? What kind of things would you hear? And what would be happening in your organisation? You know, you're part of Inspiring Change Manchester. What's happening ideally when that's a psychologically informed environment? It also means that the providers of the service receive good training and support. This is hard work that you're doing. It's demanding work, it's rewarding work, it's great work. You need to be well trained, you need to be supported. You want to know that you can be listened to, that you can listen to other people, that you give each other that atmosphere, that culture of no blame, of learning, of ever getting better, reflecting on your practice, and then creating relationships which are enabling. In other words, everybody in a psychologically informed environment should feel that they can do their best, not be judged, to be accepted for who they are, to be perhaps gently challenged, to be offered unconditional positive regard of their worth as a person. And in a psychologically informed environment as well, you're going to be evaluating outcomes. In other words, as we said earlier with the psychological part of it, it's not hit and miss. We're not talking hit and miss here. We're talking, here is a well thought out approach to the work that we're doing. How are we going to find out if it's working? Who's going to be involved? What kind of measurements should we take? What do we change as we go along if it's not as we want it to be? So that really is the basis of the psychologically informed environment. The next thing that I want to go through is well-formed outcomes. So we never start anything without some well-formed outcomes to begin with. If you have a really positive intention, then you're going to have much more chance of getting there if you've fleshed it out so you know what it looks like, so you've got a benchmark. And then when you know that, you can be asking yourself, how specifically does what I'm doing now help me move towards that outcome that I want? Most people have more than one outcome that they're working towards. Sometimes there can be very concrete goals like get a house, stop being angry, get slim. And sometimes we only know what we want in fairly abstract terms: better health, want more safety, want less hassle, want security. It doesn't matter what your outcome is, it's still useful to focus on it, because you then find ways, consciously and unconsciously, to move toward it or to refine it. If you can then make your outcome evidence-based, you can evaluate it, you can check that it's in line with the organisation and with person-centred practice. The following questions will help you to create well-formed outcomes. So you might just want to think about these, or you might want to write down your answers, in which case just stop this recording at the end of every question to give yourself time. But these are the questions that we would ask when you want to create a really well-formed outcome. The first rule is to state your outcome in the positive. So regarding this training, we might say, what do you want from this program? State it in the positive. And if you're not sure, of what you want, start with what you don't want and then discover what you want instead. That helps you to get to the positive. Put your outcome into sensory terms. In other words, what's it going to be like when you've got it? So a few questions. How will your colleagues and your service users recognise when you have your outcome? How will you know when you have it? What are you seeing? What are you seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling more of or less of when you have this? Context. Where and when do you want to have this outcome in place? Is there anywhere when you do not want this outcome? Is your outcome self-achievable? In other words, is this within your control? And is this within your resources? And sometimes we plan things and don't really look at the advantages and disadvantages. So we'd like you to consider the following. What are the advantages of reaching your outcome? What are the disadvantages of reaching your outcome? What effects will it have on those important to your role? And what if you do nothing different? What if you do nothing? And finally, is it worthwhile? So, what's the most important thing about getting your outcome? And what's the greatest benefit of you achieving it? Okay, so that's all for this section. The next section is going to be on rapport, building rapport, and all the little fine details that make rapport easier, better, and more successful. So, fine-tuning, the art of rapport. The word rapport comes from the French, and it really means, literally, to be in tune with each other, to be in a state of responsiveness, so that what one person sends out, the other person sends back. They feel in sync. Rapport occurs quite naturally between people, often without them even thinking about it. It happens at an unconscious level. We can see it between lovers who act in unison, between friends who mimic each other, between children and their carers. We see it in the streets. We see people make a connection. You just meet somebody and you instinctively seem to know that you've got some kind of rapport, something to match. You just meet someone sometimes and we just get on. Now, we can also deliberately build rapport, and we do this through paying attention. And this is useful in almost any situation where we're interacting with people. And it's really crucial. It's more than useful. It's crucial when the success of our work depends on being able to engage with others. And occasionally, we deliberately and definitely do not want rapport. And learning how to get it always also gives us the tools to break it. So the key process in building rapport with somebody is matching. Have you noticed that people who are in rapport tend to match or copy each other in a number of ways? The benefits of learning actions to build rapport are at least twofold, because with practice we develop skills at a conscious level of competence. So in other words, we know if rapport is lost, and we can choose when in particular to increase it. We also discover a natural unconscious level of competence, giving a kind of natural ability to communicate. So to build rapport, to get on better with people, to be in that state where we can respond to each other better, the areas to focus on are your physiology, your body posture, your movement, your voice characteristics. We can look very briefly here at language and thinking styles. What choice of words do people use? We can look at beliefs and values. What do people hold true and important in the world? What's really important to them? And experience, finding common ground. If we sometimes say, don't we, that people like, say, senior politicians just seem worlds apart from real life because there's no common ground. So let's have a look at each of those areas just a little bit more closely. It's me turning my page. Oh, it's me not turning my page. That's me turning my page. Okay, so let's have a look at physiology. Physiology, what a great word. Just everything that's going on in our body. You may notice that people who are getting on well together tend to adopt similar body postures. They might sit in a similar manner. They might cross or uncross their arms or legs at the same time. Or they might use similar gestures, raising an arm, a hand. They match physiology. One way to increase rapport is to deliberately match the body language and posture of the person you're communicating with. Some things you can match are an overall posture. You can sit or stand in the same way, crossing or uncrossing your arms or legs. The way you breathe, that's a really powerful thing to match. If you want to be in rapport with somebody, match their breathing. Is it fast or slow? Is it deep or shallow? Just gently. While you're developing your matching skills and for initial rapport building, the key words to remember are subtlety. Do this with subtlety and do it with respect. Generally, it's not helpful to leap in and grossly mimic every body posture and action of the person you're working with, because then, they can get pretty peed off. It can look insulting. Instead, begin by using subtle body movements in a natural way. This way, you're more likely to be unnoticed consciously and to be seen at an unconscious level as more complementary, more in tune. Respect your own body. Not everyone has perfect posture. You can only match as far as you can stay within reasonable limits of your own comfort zone. Somebody asked in the first group when we were delivering this program, the first group day, what happens? Can we take a psychologically informed environment out to the streets? And we talked about, if someone's sat on the floor, do you stand up and tower over them, or do you get down on the floor too? And generally speaking, it's get down too. But what if you can't? What if you've got bad knees, or there's any other reason that you can't? Then don't, but find a way to somehow match other things. So you will have body limitations, but you may be able to say half crouch, or just bend, or invite the person up for a cup of tea. You know, find some way to match. Matching someone's breathing patterns, as I've said earlier, is helpful. But on the other hand, you don't want to be staring at their chest, because that's a really bad move. But it's possible to see if people's breathing, if you focus on a point on a wall or in the background just over their shoulder. As you do this, you may begin to notice the rise and fall of their shoulder just at the edge of your vision, your peripheral vision. And then you can start to match this rhythm with your own breathing. So those are some areas to match. The second group we talked about was voice. So volume. Does somebody speak very quietly? Or do they speak very loudly? What's their tempo? How fast or slowly do they speak? Is their pitch high or low? What kind of tone do they have? What qualities or emotions come across? And what's their rhythm? Is there a kind of melody, bit of a tune to their sentence structure? Or are their words more pronounced and separate? And are they using characteristic sayings or regional? So, you know, I come from Birmingham, so I might say, all right, Bab. But other people might not know what Bab is. As with matching your physiology, your body, do remember to be subtle and respectful. Begin by matching one thing and then add in others. Listen carefully, and as you hear all the different aspects of a person's voice, change your own only as quickly as is natural to the flow of the conversation. And here we might say as well, beware just copying. Copying's not great. Many of us quite naturally seem to pick up other people's accents when we're with them. And you just have to be a little bit careful about that, because again, some people can see that as insulting, and it's definitely not something you would deliberately do, because that would just be patronising. So all of this is quite subtle. What about language and thinking styles? We're just going to touch on this, and it's not important how much of it you remember. But you might discover that listening to the types of language that people use can tell you quite a lot about their thinking styles. To match someone's thinking style is a powerful way to develop deep rapport. There are three main ways that we organise thinking in terms of our senses. You know, the senses, we take in all our information, don't we, through seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling or tasting. And you know what? We organise our thoughts once they're in our head by the use of seeing, hearing and feeling type language. For example, people who think a lot in terms of pictures use the language of seeing. Oh, I get the picture. All right, let's try and put this into perspective. I don't have a vision of what it's going to be like. So if you want to build rapport with these people, you might begin by adopting a similar viewpoint. Taking a look at things from a number of different angles often helps if you want to encourage people to see things in your way. Some people think in terms of what they hear. They talk to themselves a lot and use a lot of language to do with hearing. For example, I hear what you say. That sounds good to me. When you listen to these kind of words that people put in their sentences and you match them, they can realise that you talk the same language and they hear how good your words sound to them. Some people think more in terms of feeling type language, using words related to touch, smell, taste. For example, they get to grips with things. They describe things as going smoothly. They might smell a rat or like to spice up their lives. Or they might say something smells very fragrant. Woo, that's nice. This is called kinesthetic. We often just call it K. When you want to get in touch with people who have a kinesthetic thinking style, you can get a feel for the type of words they prefer to use. And if you then use similar language, you might notice how things between you are moving along nicely. Now, this is quite a lot to take in and to start to put alongside everything else. But just start to notice for now these differences, because communication depends on language. It depends on verbal language, it depends on non-verbal language. And the greater the match of language used between two people, the better the rapport and degree of understanding is likely to be. So listen for clues to thinking, because we talk how we think. Beliefs and values. Now then, they're important, aren't they? What we believe to be true about ourselves, about the world, what's important values. A deep level of rapport can be built relatively fast if you can match the current beliefs and values of the person or people you're speaking to. This is particularly useful when physiology and voice may be impossible to match. So you can match someone by saying something like, I don't know about you, but having somewhere to be my own space for a bit really helps when I'm trying to sort everything else out. So that's a belief, that's a want, a preference. It's a particularly useful form of matching sometimes when you're just trying to get in sync. And let me just emphasize about all of these things that we're talking about. You're being genuine at the same time. So we're inviting you to fine-tune some of the things that you do with people while being honest and genuine and comfortable with what you're doing. And a final area of matching which is important is experience sometimes. This can be very useful when you're working with groups. When you're presenting any type of introduction, you can get people's attention easily by referring to an experience that you guess most of them will have had just before their arrival, or perhaps a current experience, one they're having now. So you might say, I don't know how many of you arrived today by car, but wasn't the traffic heavy? Or I guess those of you who've been here before might have tried the breakfast here. And when you're talking to individuals, you know, just you notice, don't you, what state they're in, what context they're in, where you're seeing them, and you might match experience there. You know, somebody might have a dog. You might say, oh, you know, my dog, I've got a dog like this. My dog really gets hungry as the day goes. Oh, I don't know what you might say, but you might just match that experience about the dog. My dog was one of the most important things to me at one time. I don't know what that's like for you. That kind of thing. So just matching experience with people in the workplace. I don't know about you, but I find this work, I've been doing this a while now. It's really rewarding, isn't it, to be doing this sort of stuff. So you're finding an experience that you can really genuinely match with people. So we've got rapport with somebody. Why? We want to be in rapport because we want to just make communication easier. It's as simple as that. And when we have rapport, we're going to do something called pacing and leading. One of your jobs sometimes is to support your service users to create a better, more resourceful state for themselves. So we build rapport for everything. When you're coaching, and I'm going to use that word loosely, when you're coaching supportively, maybe you're doing motivational interviewing. Maybe you're giving somebody a supportive listening to. But whatever it is, you want to match enough to be in rapport. But at the same time, you need to work towards some supporting people to feel better, as we've said, and you need to look after yourselves. So you build enough rapport to pace somebody so you can gently lead them to a slightly better state. So if you're working with someone who's very down, for example, and you want to help them feel better, you want to be aware that you don't get down too. So you're going to match physiology, which will tend to be a down physiology, just enough to get good rapport, and then you're going to gently lead through changing your own physiology, your own voice tones, the speed at which you speak, so that you make changes with them in a different direction. It's not so easy to demonstrate this with one person talking to you, but it's something like if I'm with somebody who's depressed and they're talking a bit like this, and they're really down because they don't know what's going to happen next, and their shoulders are hunched and their head's low, then to begin with, I'm going to hunch my shoulders slightly, and I'm going to be on the same level as the other person. And I'm not going to speak in a really high, cheery voice because that won't work. It's a mismatch. So I might begin my work by slowly starting up and talking to people at that pace. And when we're in rapport, when I can see that we're together, there's a few nods going on, some level of understanding, then I'm just going to sit up a little bit more and I'm going to raise my voice a little. So it has been really tough, I know. I wonder what the one thing is that might make the difference for you. Now I can risk changing my voice tone. Now I can pace things up a bit. For two reasons. I can bring the other person with me, and I really need to make sure that I do not go down with them. I want them to come up a little with me. So those are some key things about rapport that we've been working on in the groups. And this really is just a prompt for you because you'll all have been in the groups, but it's just to remind you of some of the key points. The next section here is going to be about listening, really good listening, because that's one of the most important things we can do.